We usually think about history in terms of, kings and battles and big treaties. But what if we looked at a huge historical uprising through a totally different lens? What if we looked at it like a problem of human resources? What happens when a country's most important asset, its own people, is completely and totally mismanaged? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is explosive. Our whole story really starts with this one simple, powerful idea. It's a concept we hear a lot in modern economics, but I think we forget just how true it is. A nation's real wealth, it's not the gold in its vaults or the oil in the ground. No, it's the people. I mean, think about it, right? Nothing has any value by itself. It's human skill, human ingenuity that turns a lump of rock into a tool or an empty patch of land into a thriving farm. It's people, with their needs and their dreams, who are the real engine that creates value out of, well, everything. And that, right there, brings us to the big question. What happens when that engine is not just ignored, but actively broken down? To figure that out, we're going to rewind the clock to 19th century India and take a look at the massive rebellion of 1857, not as just a war, but as a catastrophic failure in managing human resources. So, first things first, before you can mismanage an entire population, you've got to take apart the structures that hold it together. You have to dismantle the traditional leadership. And this is where the pressure really starts to build. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Population distribution? That sounds like it's straight out of a geography textbook. But let's stick with our HR theme here. Instead of thinking about how people are spread out, let's think about how power is spread out. Because the British East India Company was about to redraw the entire power map of India. And here's what that redistribution of power actually looked like on the ground. You had the local leaders, the Nawabs and Rajas, and their authority was just being chipped away, piece by piece. Their armies disbanded, their money and their land taken away, bit by bit. The entire local management structure of the country was being hollowed out. And when rulers like Rani Lakshmibai tried to appeal, their concerns were just ignored. And look, this wasn't some quick, overnight coup. Oh no. This was a slow, deliberate strangling of a whole political system. Just look at the timeline for the Mughal dynasty, the symbolic heads of the country. First, they're brought under control. Then, their name is literally taken off the money. And finally, they're told their entire dynasty is coming to an end. It's a complete wipeout of their authority. So, the leadership layer? Neutralized. But that was just the start. Now the pressure started building on everybody else. That feeling of discontent began to spread from the palaces out into the fields and, crucially, into the army barracks. Out in the countryside, the economic foundation of India was starting to crack. You had peasants and landowners getting slammed with incredibly high taxes and really harsh collection rules. For so many of them, this meant losing the land their families had farmed for generations, all because they couldn't keep up. At the same time, the Indian soldiers in the company's army, the sepoys, were also feeling the squeeze. They were unhappy about their pay, their benefits, their working conditions, all of it. This was a huge mistake. The company was alienating the very people it relied on. These soldiers were their muscle, and they felt totally disrespected and undervalued. And this is where it gets so important. These weren't two separate issues. They were one and the same. You see, a lot of these sepoys were peasants themselves, or at the very least, they had families back in the villages who were suffering under these new laws. So all that anger from the countryside, it flowed right into the military barracks. And then came what might just be the single biggest HR blunder in history. The company started making rules that went beyond pay or land. They started attacking the core beliefs of their own soldiers. There was this deeply held belief that crossing the sea would cause a man to lose his religion and his place in society. Instead of respecting that, the company punished soldiers who refused. And then they made overseas travel mandatory for all new recruits. They were basically ignoring the very soul of their workforce. So just imagine the scene. You've got an entire population under immense pressure, politically, economically, and now spiritually. It's a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And what's incredible is that we have a first-hand account of the moment that spark was lit. This comes to us from a man named Vishnu Bhatt Godse, who was traveling in the area at the time. He writes that he was literally stopped on the road by a group of sepoys, and they had a pretty chilling warning for him. 3 days. Can you imagine hearing that? All of that simmering anger suddenly had a deadline. The soldiers weren't just complaining anymore. They were organized. They were planning. The clock was officially ticking. So what was it? What was that final straw? Well, according to the sepoys, it was this: a rumor about a list of 84 new rules that were designed to destroy both Hinduism and Islam. All of a sudden, this wasn't about taxes or land anymore. This was an existential threat, and it united a hugely diverse population against one single enemy. And this fear wasn't just a rumor anymore. No, it had transformed into a real organized plan. A date was set. A secret strategy was being passed from one military base to the next, starting from Meerut. The ultimate resource was about to show its ultimate power. All right, let's bring this all the way back to our original idea. We've seen a population get pushed way past its breaking point. But what does that power, the power of the people, actually look like? Well, it turns out there's a tool from Human Resources that gives us a pretty amazing way to visualize it. So this is a population pyramid. Normally, it's used by economists and geographers to show the age and gender of a country's population, to understand the workforce. But if we look at it with our historical glasses on, it becomes this perfect metaphor for the structure of a rebellion. Because a rebellion, it has its very own pyramid. The leaders, the famous names, they're just the tiny little tip at the very top. The real power, the unstoppable force, comes from that huge, wide base at the bottom. The peasants, the soldiers, the landowners, all of them fused together by a shared sense of anger. You take away that foundation, and the whole thing just crumbles. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? You can't manage human resources just by counting heads or looking at spreadsheets. You have to understand the human part. You have to know about their culture, their faith, their sense of honor. The British East India Company learned the hard way that when you ignore those things, your greatest asset can become your most powerful enemy. And that's the question that this whole story leaves hanging in the air. If people really are the ultimate resource, what's the ultimate cost of ignoring them? The events of 1857 provide a pretty brutal answer. It's a powerful lesson in where power really comes from, reminding us that respecting people isn't just a nice thing to do, it's the most important investment any leader can ever make.